Ladies and gents, boys and girls, welcome to the July 2023 update on the performance of my solar array. I'm sorry it's taken so long to get this video out there. I've tried a million times and something always distracts me. But here we go. So first of all, the disclaimer, please pause and read. I'm not an expert. There may be some mistakes in the things that I tell you. Let's get on to the key metrics. So over the lifetime of my array, we have produced 10,874 kilowatt hours. In 2023 year to date, we have produced 4,690. This time last year, we had produced 4,147, which means we're up by 543 or 13%. And remember, we have 4 extra panels kind of facing south, so the majority of this additional production is down to them. In terms of electricity imported from the grid, this year we have imported 3,503 kilowatt hours or 3.5 megawatt hours, compared to same time last year we had imported just 929. So that's a whopping increase of 2,574 kilowatt hours or 277%. The primary reason for this is because of the electric car. Last year we weren't using it much and we were using free credit that we had where we could charge at public charging points. This year we have to charge at home for all the driving we're doing. But most of this energy is purchased off-peak. In terms of gas, we have consumed 18,381 kilowatt hours compared to 18,859 last year, which means we're down by 478 kilowatt hours or 2.5%. This is probably due to the eddy. This summer hasn't been as hot as the summer from the previous year, so we may have been drawing a tiny bit more gas in comparison, especially when our system wasn't working properly. But the gas saving here will be down to the eddy most probably, because we didn't have it optimized last year. CapEx has remained the same. We have not spent any more money on the system this year. And in terms of OPEX savings, this year we have already saved £3,357.69, compared to this point last year we had saved £1,219.78. So we are up by £2,137 or 175%. Now most of this is due to the fact that we have a battery, an additional battery, which we didn't have at this point last year. It was installed at the end of July, if I remember correctly. So this will be the final month where we see like dramatic savings compared to last year. And also last year we weren't heating the hot water overnight via the eddy, which we have been doing so far this year, but then I'll update you again on that in a minute. So in general, we have learned how to use the system and optimized it a bit this year compared to last year. But a big chunk of the savings still comes from driving the electric car. Not having to buy diesel and then using electricity, which is either free or very cheap, is having a dramatic effect on this whole thing. Okay, so let's get into some numbers. The details from Enphase are, for the month of July, we produced 907 kilowatt hours of electricity. We exported 127 kilowatt hours and we imported 276 kilowatt hours. So in total, that meant our house consumed 1.1 megawatt hours in total. If you look at the graph, you can see that we have a lot of blue, which means that there is sunshine producing our electricity, and the more blue you see and the less grey you see on the top of this bar means that more of our daily demand is being met by free solar production rather than having to pull power from the grid. So you can see certainly in the first kind of half of July, the majority of days were completely blue with hardly any or no grey, and that meant we were running the house for free. But you do see days like this one over here, the 4th, and this one, the 16th and 26th, etc., where we have these massive chunks of grey. This is where we're charging the car overnight from the grid because we have a long drive to do and we need more power. The other days, like over here, where you see small segments of grey, this will be where we're pulling power from the grid because the battery hasn't got us through the night before and we're trying to charge the car, heat, water, whatever we're doing, so we're still pulling power from the grid. And the way that I will have done it is kind of set up everything to drain the battery down by kind of 11:30 when our cheap tariff kicks in, so our overnight demand, where we have to pull power from the grid, is being done on the cheap rate. on the bottom half of this graph, the grey segments that you see on the bottom of this is export back to the grid. So this is where we have met the house's base load, we have fully charged the batteries, we have heated the hot water, either the car's fully charged or the car's not plugged in, and we still have excess solar, and so the only place to send it is back to the grid. So you can see that on quite a few days, particularly the first half of July, we were exporting power back to the grid, and then from around here somewhere we seem to have dropped off and we're not exporting anything back to the grid, or it's tiny. And the reason for that is, if you remember last month I told you about our hot water cylinder playing up. So until about the 20th or something of July, the hot water cylinder wasn't working properly, and it also meant that the immersion heater in that hot water cylinder wasn't working. So it was out of action. So instead of our house having 2 immersion heaters heating water, we were down to just 1 in the other tank. So we got it all fixed and working somewhere around the 20th of July. So that's where you can see we've stopped having grey segments on the bottom where we export, and instead we're managing to consume all the electricity because we have a second water tank to heat. The story behind the water tank is that it was 20 years old, it was corroding, and the way that one was designed is to start leaking when it's toast. So the plumber came along and replaced it for us, but he was very busy and it took him 3 or 4 weeks before he finally came back after I called him to actually get it installed. But when he installed it, he told me that he had tested the immersion heater and it's working, but yet I wasn't able to control it from the eddy. And I wasn't at home when he was doing this, I was away. So I was speaking to him on the phone and was like, how can you have tested that the immersion heater is working if the immersion heater is not working? Because I can see from the eddy that I can't turn it on. So then he said to me that the fuse spur, which powers the immersion heater, is broken. So again, I came back to the same question. How did you test that the immersion heater was working if the fuse spur that provides it power is broken? Or you suspect it's broken? So he couldn't answer the question, so I told him just to kind of leave it until I got back and checked it all out myself. And I went and checked the eddy, that was working properly. I went and checked the first fuse spur that we have near the eddy for this particular immersion heater. That has a little neon LED in it, and that was working fine. So I went to the second fuse spur that we have, which is near the water tank in the immersion heater. That particular one didn't have a fuse spur on it, and that's what they suspected was the problem. So I got a new fuse spur and I swapped it out, and everything started working. So the plumber's diagnosis was correct. It's just that, in my view, it was a guess. He had no way of actually proving that was, or he didn't prove that was actually where the problem was. That was just the next thing in the sequence to check, and he turned out to be correct. Anyway, everything's up and running and working properly now, as we expect. So both water tanks are getting heat via the immersion heater. So overall for the month of July, we were only 26% dependent on the grid, but the bulk of that is driven from the days where we had to charge the car. If you take those out of the equation, I think this number is going to be pretty small. If you look at the solar panels, the front of the house and the summer house are doing the bulk of the work, but the rear of the house, which faces kind of northwest, is still making a reasonable contribution, including that panel which is affected by the neighbour's dormer. All right, moving on. The best day was the 7th of July. We didn't have enough power in the battery from the night before to survive the whole way, but you can see from about 3 a.m. we're drawing power from the grid, and then we have what looks like the most perfect curve over here, and we have a blip around 4 p.m. A cloud must have come by, and then we have more sunshine over here until it drops off. If you look at the bottom of the curve very carefully, you can see all of this orange, which means we're consuming all the power, charging the car, charging the battery, heating the hot water. And then we get to around 11:30, 12 noon. Then you start to see these grey slivers appear. Now, this is not because everything is fully charged, but it's because we've actually maxed out our inverting capacity. So the battery's got a 3 kilowatt inverter, so it can only take 3 kilowatts of sunshine and dump that into the battery at that rate. The eddy I have reduced to stop stratification. I've reduced its power output to 2.1 kilowatts. So 3 plus 2.1, that's 5.1 kilowatts, plus our base load at the house, which is about 600 watts usually. So 5.7 kilowatts, assuming the car's not plugged in on this day, is the max that our house is able to consume at any one point without exporting to the grid. So around lunchtime on these days, we must have been producing more than 5.7 kilowatts, and therefore the system had to start sending some of that to the grid. If the car was plugged in, then we have an additional 7 kilowatts of inverting power, so that would take us to 12.7 kilowatt hours, which is immense, more than we're ever going to need. So anyway, you can see that we started exporting the bulk of our power to the grid. This little sliver of orange in this one here is probably when the eddy kicked in again, because the hot water was used up and the immersion heaters could do a little bit. But all afternoon we were sending power back to the grid. You can see we exported a whopping 18 kilowatts this day. And the car is very obviously not plugged in. So in the evening, the batteries are fully charged, and you can see that we were running for free all evening. Looking at the worst day, that was the 14th of July, we only produced 9.3 kilowatt hours. Looking at the graph, this was a very cloudy day. We had enough power to survive the night, but from sunrise, the amount of solar production kept fluctuating quite a lot as clouds come over. And what happens is that the inverter is not able to kind of ramp up and ramp down quick enough, and so you start to see these little segments of grey above the blue where we're having to buffer and use the grid to supply us power, where the inverter can't match the pace of the cloud cover. But then we had enough power in the battery to survive the night, and we didn't put anything from the grid besides these little bits of noise. Okay, household electricity consumption. So we're looking at the last bar on the far right over here. Overall, we consumed 1,056 kilowatt hours. Okay, so 553 kilowatt hours was solar power servicing the base load of our house. We had to put a further 88 kilowatt hours to service the base load of our house, but this came from the grid. Looking at the red segments over here, there's a tiny dark red segment there. It's about 3 kilowatt hours, and that's where we had to pull power from the grid at peak time to charge the car. We then have this segment here, which is about 140 kilowatt hours, and that is charging the car from the grid off peak. And then we have 92 kilowatt hours, which is charging the car from free solar power. The green segments, the dark green, which looks like it's about 60 or 70 kilowatt hours, is heating hot water from off-peak electricity from the grid, and 129 kilowatts here of free solar power heating our hot water. You can see it's significantly less than the previous months, and that is again because one of the immersion heaters is out of action. And finally, below the line, we have a significant amount of export, again because the immersion heater is out of action and the car's not plugged in, so we have exported what looks like about 150 kilowatt hours back to the grid. Looking at our gas consumption then, so for the month of July, with basically the central heating switched off, we are very similar to the month of June, and we are also very similar to the summer last year. And we are less than the summer of the year before. So 623 kilowatt hours worth of gas consumed in total. 442 went into the second portion of our house. This is higher than the previous month because we are having to heat hot water using gas because that immersion heater is broken. But if you look at the main portion of our house, it is pretty much level pegging. So the only times we use gas is for hot water and a bit of cooking. Okay, and then the amount of green is a bit smaller again because we're not pumping power via the eddy into the second immersion heater. Okay, looking at our Octopus bill. So for one portion of our house we were charged £41 for gas, the other portion £21, and for electricity we paid £36.58 in the month of July. Normally over here I show you how much we received from Octopus for exporting electricity. However, I have switched from Octopus to Scottish Power. Now the reason for this is that Octopus pay 4.1 pence per kilowatt hour for export, and Scottish Power are paying 12 point something. So we're going to get 3 times as much. Now I processed the switch with Scottish a couple of months ago, and it's taken them a very long time to do the switch. It's not like when you switch your import where they have to get it done in 72 hours. With export it's so far taken them 2 months, and they still, actually we're on 3 months now, and they still haven't actually got it done. They keep drip feeding me every once in a while with a bit of paperwork and an email. I don't know why it's taking them so long. Part of the problem is they're expecting me to be a brand new person, and the first time I've ever exported electricity And so their process requires me to get an MPAN number from the DNO, produce all the paperwork and MCS certification. Then they're going to go and make sure I've got an export number. All of this stuff, it just takes time. It hasn't occurred to them that I already have all of this stuff in place. They just need to kind of tick it off and get straight on with, paying me. So anyway, I'm kind of following their process and wasting my time because it's going to pay out more. And a few weeks ago, I received an email to register to receive payments from them. Because I don't have my import with them, they're only going to be paying me money, so I need to register to receive payments. The weird thing that I found out at that point, after processing the switch, is they only issue the payments to you once every 6 months. And I have to register on a weird Spanish portal of theirs, with a Spanish website address, with all my payment details and MPAN number and all this kind of stuff. So it's a little bit off-putting. It's not as slick as Octopus. It's once a month. It's very easy to use and easy to enter the meter readings. But we'll see how it goes when it actually starts working and I can calculate the numbers. Okay, referrals. So I still think Octopus is fantastic for your import of electricity. They've got all sorts of smart tariffs, and they've recently just announced that they're offering fixed tariffs again. So if you are interested in switching, feel free to use the link that you see there on the screen, which is in the comments as well. And if you choose to call them up, you can quote SoftJewel 489, and then both of you and I will receive £50 off our next bill. Looking at the My Energy, this is my consumption graph. So as I said before, for the first kind of half of July up until around here, the immersion heater in the second tank was not working. So you only see these kind of green bars. And then from somewhere over here, we got the immersion heater in the other tank working. So you see green and light grey bars. Okay, representing the power going into the immersion heater. Okay, installer estimates. So this is probably one of my favorite graphs because it really proves my point that getting solar panels and batteries and having an electric car is all worth it from a financial point of view. So my installer at the end of year 2 thinks I will produce 9,832 kilowatt hours of electricity. I am 1.5 years in, and we have already produced 10,874. So we have surpassed their estimate by 11%, and we still have 3 or 4 months to go to reach a complete 2 years. So my expectation is we'll be on something like 125%. They then say that we will consume only 50% of what we produce. So the end of year 2 estimate on consumption is 4,916 kilowatt hours. Well, we actually hit that target by the end of year 1. So everything that we are consuming right now in year 2 is over and above what they expect. Okay? Now, why is any of this relevant? Because if you contact a solar installer and ask them to kind of quote you for a system, they'll give you their figure, and they are required by MCS to issue you with a whole bunch of standard paperwork. And one of the things in the paperwork is their forecast on payback, as in how long will it take you to break even on your investment. And more often than not, the payback period is about 18 years. But what I'm proving to you here, and my paperwork which I received said about 18 years to break even. What I'm proving to you here is that we are producing about 25% more than they claimed, and we are consuming more than double what they claimed. So if we're able to consume more than double what they claimed, it means that we're buying electricity from the grid much less often, which means we will hit break even a lot quicker. So you'll see in a minute, my forecast is consistently on about 6 to 7 years versus the 18 years that they have forecasted. So the point I'm trying to make here is that if you produce more than they claim and you consume more than they claim, you are most definitely going to beat their production and consumption and payback estimates out of the water. And that is what I'm doing here. Okay, the graph on the right hand side is what we produced versus what we consumed. And this is important because every bit of electricity that we're producing, we want to consume it. We don't want to give it back to the grid, even if they're going to pay us, because it costs us more to purchase it from them later on. So the aim of the game here is to try to have all of these bars which is with as much green in them as possible and less blue. Now you can see now this summer we have a lot more blue than we've had before, and that's because we've added more south-facing panels, so we have a lot more production. The car is not plugged in as much as it was last year, and therefore we have to give some of this power back to the grid. It's not ideal, but it's a last resort. Okay, let's move on. So the big pivot table. I'm going to read out the numbers that you see in the July column. So as I said before, we produced 907 kilowatt hours. We exported 133. Therefore, the house consumed a grand total, or we consumed a grand total of 774 kilowatt hours. Of that, the house consumed 553, the eddy consumed 128, and the car consumed 92. We imported 281 kilowatts of electricity from the grid, and we imported 623 kilowatt hours of gas from the grid. Our capex investment has stayed the same. Now, our unit price for electricity reduced on the 1st of July, and the reduction in gas from 10.19 pence to 7.4 pence is about 25%, and the reduction in electricity from 41.65 pence to 31.03 pence is also about 25%, roughly. The off-peak rate of electricity stayed the same, and the export rate of electricity stayed the same. But I've highlighted this in a red box because when we switched to Scottish and they finally do everything, they claim that they will backdate the payment to the day that I applied to them, even if the switch doesn't happen for another 3 or 4 months. So although Octopus have been calculating export payments for me, I've highlighted these boxes in red as I'm likely to have to backdate a correction when I finally get the correct numbers out of Scottish Power. So until I get those numbers, we're going to have a little bit of a discrepancy, but it's small numbers in the grand scheme of things, so it won't make a material difference. Now, although I knew that the electricity and energy rates were changing on the 1st of July, the penny hadn't dropped in my mind that gas has now become cheaper than off-peak electricity. And therefore, where I was using the eddy to heat our hot water overnight on cheap electricity, it's now more economical just to let it use gas. It's only a tiny amount, right? 7.4 pence versus 7.5 pence, but it's cheaper. Now, you might argue that you prefer to use electricity because it's green. Well, that's fair enough. But if you're looking at this from a financial point of view, then at least in my case, it's now become cheaper to use gas than it has been for electricity. So I didn't realize this until like the last week of July when I was putting these numbers together. So for the entire month of July, you're going to see that it's actually costing me a fraction more money than it could have done because I've been using electricity to do water rather than gas. But I've sorted that out for August, and so everything will be back on track. All right, let's look at our savings then. The house has saved £171 by being powered by solar power. By having the off-peak rate and charging our battery, we have saved £16. By using the eddy, we have saved £9.54 with free solar power. It's cost us 6 pence to use the eddy off-peak instead of using gas. As I said, this is how much Octopus would have been paying us for our export, but these numbers are not valid until I receive the correct numbers from Scottish Power. So I'll backdate a correction when I get the numbers. Looking at the car, charging from solar power has saved us £6.84. Charging from the grid has cost me £1.24. Charging from the grid at off-peak time has cost me £9.16, and charging from public charging points has cost me £31.66. It would have otherwise cost us £307.99 worth of diesel for the amount of driving that we did, so we've saved that. So when you net out all these numbers, having the electric car has saved us £272.76 on energy in the month of July, because it's basically cost us about £40 to charge a car compared to paying £308 for diesel. So that means there's a net saving of £272. So the grand total here is for the month of July, we've saved £476.21, which takes our cumulative total to £6,170. And that means we've got a balance of £17,320 until we break even. We have paid back 26% of our system now. Okay, so we're over a quarter of the way there. and the forecast is that we will break even in 6 years and 6 months. And this number continues to decrease as we go forward. So I reckon this will maybe, it's still not settling. I thought it would have settled by now, but my guesstimate now is it's going to settle on about the 6-year mark. Okay, looking at the payback curve then, so the aim of the game here is this green line here, it needs to catch up with this blue line up at the top for us to break even. So you can see that we are about a quarter of the way there. All the different coloured lines below represent the different kind of categories of saving, like the eddy, the SEG tariff, etc., etc. They all add up to the green line. Okay, so it's still not that exciting, but you can see that this green line is starting to get a little bit parabolic. We're starting to get there. So we're moving in the right direction. Okay, well that's it for the month of July. I'm sorry the video is late. I hope you found it useful. Please like and subscribe. Consider using the Octopus link. Consider switching to Scottish for your export. If you're willing to take on some of the difficulty that I'm having and the amount of time it takes them to process everything, because you will get paid more. If you have an array where you can't consume and you are exporting massive amounts, that might be more financially beneficial for you. All right, catch you in the next video.